Hi there. Well, what do Nelson Mandela, Harry Potter, and Spider-Man have in common? Two very fictitious characters and one very real human being. Can you imagine what the undeniable common thread is between all three? Well, as a child in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was inspired by stories of his ancestors' valor in wars of resistance. He dreamed of making a contribution to the freedom struggle that his people went through. And he was threatened with an arranged marriage early in his life. And so he just fled. He left and went off on his own path. And we know much about his story. He ended up for 20 years leading the apartheid struggle to bring peace between Blacks and whites, and landed in prison for 27 years. He was freed in 1990 and then became president a few years later. And then there's Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter ended up in the Dursleys' home and was forced to sleep under the stairs and unable to participate in the family's fun times. And what happens? An owl appears one day and drops a letter on the doorstep. That letter never made it to Harry. It was addressed to him, never made it. And consequently, many other letters started flying in. Remember this? And trying to get in through the door. But of course, the Dursleys didn't want Harry to get any kind of mail, so they scooped them all up, they burned them, they tried to get rid of them, until finally Hagrid shows up one day. It's like it wouldn't stop. So as we know in the story of Harry Potter, he goes on to Hogwarts and he's invited to learn magic there and meets all kinds of tests and trials while he's there. And eventually, at the end of it all, he comes to find peace in the Muggle world and in the world of wizards. And then there is Peter Parker, the story of Spider-Man. Peter Parker was a high school nerd, and he was out on a school trip to a lab and accidentally was bitten by a radioactive spider, which gave him amazing skills as Spider-Man. And he went on to fight the people that were against him and the people that he loved, including the Green Goblin. He defeats the Goblin and makes peace with his own skills. So all of these characters and this real life human being have this important thread that I want to talk about today and why it's important for you and for me. It's the hero's journey. And I bet you've heard about the hero's journey. When I first heard about it in the late 1980s, because Joseph Campbell created it and popularized it at that time, I knew one day it would mean a lot more to me. At the time, I was quite fascinated. What Joseph Campbell did, in case you don't know, is that he researched tons of myths and legends from around the world, origin stories of all kinds. And what he discovered was that across the world, no matter what culture, there is something called the hero's journey. And he developed the stages of that journey. The very first stage and the second stage are what I want to talk about today, because they really speak to all of us in a very profound way. Here's what they're about. The very first stage, the ordinary world, is where we're just living our lives. You know, Harry was at the Dursleys and Nelson Mandela was in his family home, and Peter Parker was just a high school nerd. And then something happens. There is a call to action or a call to adventure. And all three of these characters were met by something. In Harry Potter's part of the call to adventure, it was that owl showing up and all the letters arriving. For Spider-Man, it was that spider bite. And for Nelson Mandela, it was that you're going to have an arranged marriage. So he fled, right? We are all given these kinds of calls to adventure. And the question is, what are we doing with them? I want to talk about how they show up, because there are lots of different ways of talking about what these calls are. But one very significant concept for me, which was given to me by a mentor that I had for 20 years, Dr. Brad Brown, is this idea of life shocks, LIFESHOCKS, life shocks. Now, a life shock is a moment in time in which something happens you don't want or expect. So imagine we're getting life shock moments coming into our lives all the time. They might come in the way of an email that we get that we don't want or expect. We see certain words in that email, or perhaps our partner or someone in our life gives us a life shock by telling us something we really wish we didn't have to hear, or it's a shock to us. We're told you're fired, or I want a divorce, or a simple life shock would be going to the grocery store and you go and get something specific. You get there, you look on the shelf, and that freeze frame moment, and the item is sold out. So these life shock moments are freeze frame moments in our lives. It's as if you took the remote on our lives, press the pause, and there is this very specific moment in which something happens. What I want you to know is that inside of that life shock moment is something waiting for us. I've worked with this concept for over 30 years, and I love how it plays out in life and what it has to teach us. Sometimes people get life shocks and triggers confused, but let me clarify. A trigger is something that happens to us. For example, you could say you go home for Christmas, there's a lot of family there, and you might come back and say, "Woo, I got really triggered at Christmas." Well, that's a lot of life shock moments. There's the time when your mother said, there's the time when this specific thing, that specific thing happened. But life shock moments come to us through our five senses. They're always coming from the outside to us. And what I want to suggest is that they're actually here to teach us something, if we know how to decode the message that they're bringing us. In our own hero's journey, we're going to discover, receive lots and lots of life shocks in the various stages of that journey. I'm going to be sharing that hero's journey the way that I've redefined it as the journey back to joy in my work with people. And over these next few episodes, I'm going to take it apart segment by segment so you can see how this applies to you and hopefully bring you some new insights into your own life, but also into the hero's journey itself. These life shock moments, when they arrive into our ordinary world, we're just going about our lives and these things happen, small and quite large. They affect us if we allow them to, if we take them in through our senses and allow ourselves to actually feel the life shock moment. Here's an example. I remember a time when I was working on my graduate thesis and I was under a time crunch and I was typing away, and that moment that you don't want to have happen on a deadline happened. My screen went completely black. And of course, I'm pressing all the buttons, trying to figure out all the keys, trying to figure out what to do and bring that screen back, because I had a very short amount of time to finish what I was working on. But my computer did not turn on. It just went stone cold flat. That was a life shock moment, not on the scale of really big things, but somewhere in there, and at that time, it really mattered to me. And so I really recognized in that moment when I saw that screen go black like that, I was looking right at it. And there's no sound coming from the computer. And I can hear my husband, Tom, in the other room talking on the phone. right in that freeze frame moment. And I decided some things in that moment. And this is partially what I want to talk about today, because every time we get a life shock moment, I want to suggest something is going on between our ears. We are working at rapid fire speed between our ears to decide how we're going to feel about what's happening. That's an automatic reaction. And how we're going to react or respond. So in that moment when that happened to me, I immediately went into lots of chatter about how this paper I was working on was going to be late and how stupid I was because I hadn't backed it up. And now my computer was gone and I was going to have to pay the price for all of this. I was already making up stories with my graduate advisor in my mind about what I was going to say and how I was going to move my date forward and get out of this mess. I want to suggest that all of that occurred inside of me within a few seconds. How do I know this? Because in this work of dealing with life shocks and working with them, I've learned how to slow down time, how to bend time in a sense, and allow myself through the power of my own feelings, knowing where the feelings are in my body, receiving the life shock, noticing that I pushed it away at the time. I didn't want it. I didn't expect it. And this certainly was the wrong time for me. When Harry Potter, unbeknownst to him, was receiving all of those letters, and the Dursleys, the couple that were taking care of him, so to speak, were finding all these letters on the floor in the foyer. They just certainly didn't want these life shocks. They were all dressed to Harry. They didn't know what it was about, but it didn't matter to them because he was unimportant to them. So of course they were trying to get rid of what was arriving at their door. We often do this. Something coming to us with a message, if we're only awake enough to hear it or see it, smell it, taste it, feel it. But a lot of times they go unnoticed, and there we are into our reactivity. But if we learn to bend time, to slow down time, we're able to actually do something quite profound. We're able to dive into that moment and see what is on offer for us. So in my own depiction of the hero's journey, the journey back to joy, I talk about how to do this, how to bend time so that you can be with what is happening in an incredible way. Back when I was learning about life shocks and beginning to teach about this, mindfulness was barely a word in the American culture. Today, of course, it's everywhere. Even insurance companies are using it to talk about their services. So it's become a little rote and cliche when we hear it. And it's up to us to bring beginner's mind to it, open the door and see what more is there for us in something that's talked about quite often and has lost some of its flair. But mindfulness, kind of on steroids, is what I'm talking about. So let's take a look for a moment. When that happened with my screen, and I was able to later on go back and close my eyes and bring that life shock moment of looking at that screen as it goes dark and feel my feelings. I felt really tight in my chest, a lot of anxiety, and I just like a complete tightening up all over me, and had me punching the keys and trying to make it better and fix it and all of that, which is an automatic behavior on my part. My automatic self loves to jump in and try to fix things. And I've learned over time that's not always the best way to go about it. But your automatic mind has you doing certain things. It might have you avoiding what's happening. It might have you blaming what's happening. It might have you just hiding out in general, not wanting to know from it, not wanting to know anything about it. Or maybe you're a fighter. Perhaps you go into victim mode. This always happens to me. Whatever it is that we do in our reactive mind, we're going to do that first, unless we're paying attention to the life shock moments and recognizing, oh, I just got a life shock. It didn't take me very long after I was punching away at keys to recognize, oh, okay, this is a life shock. I got it. All right, breathe. And what's my mind telling me right now? And my mind was chattering away at all this stuff and about what I was going to have to do and how long this was going to take. And I'd better hurry up. And Apple has a waiting list. So how am I going to get in and get my computer fixed in time, et cetera, et cetera. But when I recognized that my mind was really taking me down the river one more time, then I was able to stop, slow down, and do this thing of diving into the life shock moment. Not something you want to do with what you would call a trigger, but a life shock moment has something for us. So if you're able to do that and listen in, you can go, wait a minute. So my mind is telling me I'm not going to be able to get into Apple. It's telling me this is going to take way too long. It's telling me I got to make up excuses with my advisor. It's telling me I'm really stupid because I should have done something different than what I did. Like all that stuff, right? I can literally take each one of those things, write them down in a column, and go back and just let it pour out. Let it pour out onto the page, all those statements. And what I know after having taught this to thousands of people over time is that we all have it. It's all of us have this mind chatter going on, this mind talk, whatever you call it, negative self-talk, monkey mind. It's very well known now that we have this going on. But I want to say, when I first started teaching all of this years ago, I'd walk into a room full of people in a workshop and start talking about negative self-talk, and I'd see these quizzical stares coming back. That's because the consciousness at the time, people were not so aware of this negative self-talk. Now we're so aware of it that we can skip right past it and really not know what it has to give us. What we're most interested in doing these days is banishing it, making it wrong, putting it away, saying, all this is bad. I don't need this. And I'm going to be talking in future shows about what you can do rather than claiming it as wrong, some other ways that you can work with this mind chatter so that you have a little toolbox of things that you can do. But I think in the beginning of talking about this, it's really important to point out a very simple thing that you can do that's completely foundational to working with life shocks and the mind chatter that rolls out from them. And that is, you've got to know what's true, what's false, and what is a don't know. What's a don't know? It's something in the future. It's something that someone else brings into the picture that you can't even know because you're not talking to them and you're not asking them. That's a don't know. But being able to clarify internally, is this a true statement? Do I know for a fact that this is going to take a long time to get fixed? No, I don't. That's a false statement. But my mind has already decided it's going to take a long time. That's what has me so anxious. That's what's driving all of that frenetic activity and my stomach getting tight and all of that. Is it true that I'm stupid because I didn't back up my computer? Well, some of those kinds of things, those negative core beliefs, can be repetitive. We've heard them lots of times over our life. We may not be aware of how often it's playing out or how fast it's playing out, but it's there. And of course, I've met that one many, many times. I should have been doing something different than what I was doing. Know that one? Somehow I should have been in charge and in control of what was going on. Ultimately, that's what we're all trying to do, is to get that little corner of control in our lives so that we can feel safe and we can quell that anxiety. We can get that anxiety to slow down and leave us alone. But this ability to go back into that mind chatter and listen to it, write it down, and know that is false, that's false, that's false. What I have found over time is that, I don't know, 95 to 99% of that mind chatter is completely false. What's true at the end of a process like that? Feelings are always true. If I write down, I'm scared, I'm worried, all that stuff, that's true. I can put a big T by that sentence that I wrote down. But all the other things about what I believe is going to happen in the future, and what I'm believing about me, and also what I'm believing about other people, like my graduate advisor, I'm already deciding that she is going to be resistant to me needing a little more time, that I'm going to need more time to start with, and that there's going to be a problem there. And so I'm anxious about that already, but I don't know any of that. So anything to do with someone else, I can immediately put a DK for don't know. And if I want to get a little more advanced about it, I can claim it as a false and put an F by it, because my mind is saying it's true. Get it? So at the end of the process, I'm looking down the list of all of these things as I bent time, went inside, expanded that life shock moment, let myself feel all of the feelings that occurred in that moment, not thinking back on it, but actually being in the moment. True mindfulness, letting myself go back and experience that one single moment in time of the black screen. Then I can access all of this information about what I'm believing about myself, my life, and other people. I'm then free to decide, okay, so what really happened here? All right, I was typing, I was on a deadline, and my screen went black. That's what really happened. Everything else was an add-on. And now I get to choose a new action plan. What is it that I'm going to do that will really meet this moment in a more grounded and clear way? So the more you do this kind of process, the more you can do it in the moment, in the moment, in the moment, or within a few seconds or a few minutes of something happening to you, you can go just on the fly. Well, that's false. Oh, that's not true. That's not true. Well, okay, I get it. I'm anxious because I'm believing that I know how things are going to be. I'm believing I know how things are going to be. And do I know? No. So now what do I want to do? Well, I made a call to a shop that takes care of these kinds of computers, went there immediately. They were able to work on it. Took a solid week to get it back. And in the meantime, I did write my professor and said, look, this is what happened, but I'm busy at work on another computer. Hadn't thought of that at the time. Busy at work on another computer, and my document was saved into the cloud. So I was able to keep working. Just a little bit of a glitch in there as far as getting used to another computer and all that stuff. But I was able to get the paper done. None of the stuff happened that I was worried about. So for Nelson Mandela, we know he had tons of life shocks in his struggle, his hero's journey to bring peace into South Africa. And when he was set free and able to really work with Blacks and whites in South Africa and help to bring about peace in the country, and then to be elected as a democratic ruler, president of his country, amazing tests and challenges that he went through, tons and tons of life shocks while he was in prison for those 27 years. Harry Potter, we know those long movies, how great that stuff was. And we saw Harry meet his tests and challenges over and over again with Voldemort and various characters. And he also had a lot of help along the way. By stopping and assessing what was going on, he was able to meet many of his moments. And of course, Spiderman, same story. He was able to notice that the work that he was called to do had a sense of purpose in it. And that's what I want you to know, is that inside of these life shock moments that we're all receiving, there is a call to purpose. There is a call to right action. There is a call to notice how we're doing, how our physical being is doing. And there's a call to notice what the mind is doing with the whole situation, self, others, and life. So I want to invite you into that kind of exploration on the hero's journey. We've just covered the call to adventure. And then there is that, the ordinary world. And then there is that place where, like me, when I was looking at that screen, I had a no to all of that. And that is the next step on the journey, is the refusal to hear that call, to accept that the life shock is real, to avoid, to push back, to blame, to fight, to avoid whatever we can in the whole situation, and to size up what's happening to us, when actually something much bigger is on offer. So Joseph Campbell says, when you follow your bliss, and I'll translate that in this moment to mean this: when you follow your bliss in the moment, you're able to open up the life shock moment and give it some room and then time and go inside it. There's a state of being that we enter into where it's the only moment that matters at that time. We can be right there. He says, when you're committed to that kind of path, when you have that sense of purpose, then you can count on the world awaiting you and opening up to you and giving you more than you expected. It offers you a path through, and I want to suggest that that is the bold and brave journey back to joy, which awaits all of us. In future shows, I'll talk a little bit about my own life shocks, and I'll also be inviting other women who have had their significant life shock moments, big ones in their lives. And they have something to share with us about how they met those tests and trials and challenges, and what they have discovered in that process and where they are now. So I hope that that sounds interesting to you, because I tell you what, it lights me up. Thanks for being here today, and I hope to see you right here again next week. Lots of love. Have an amazing day.